Hello, BookTube, and Happy New Year from the middle of a bomb cyclone. Boston, as some of you may know, if you're watching the news or are unlucky enough to live here, is in the middle of an exaggerated weather event, an extreme weather event, bombogenesis. Right now, we're being battered by a blizzard of just enormous proportions. The coastal flooding, the videos that I've seen, looks like something out of New Orleans. And even here at Hyde Cottage, the snow is blasting horizontally, and wind is really strong. The sky has had no real sunlight in the course of the day and is unlikely to. And that's not even the end of it. The same system that is allowing this to happen is also going to allow in the next 2 days Martian levels of cold. Just -10 Fahrenheit, -16 Fahrenheit. The forecasts say that it's all going to warm up by the beginning of next week. But first, after we have mountains of snow and blocked roads and no visibility at all, we're then going to have just crushing cold, worse even than the cold spell that we just had. But as long as I've got electricity here at Hyde Cottage, as long as I've got a space heater and some comfy gloves and a nice warm puppy, I thought I would recommence making videos now that I'm back in 2018. The first one that I want to make is one that I'm a little bit late on. Beginning of every month, of course, is the time when booktubers make their TBRs for the upcoming month. And it's not entirely practical for me to do that, just in terms of how many books I would be holding up for the camera. So what I tend to do is make a TBR BY, a to be read by you. Basically, 10 recommendations of books for the upcoming month that you might be interested in, that you might not see, that you might not know about. I want to show them to you and tell you a little bit about them. And for the first time ever, for that purpose, I'm going to be using the Lenovo Yoga book. So we'll see how that goes. So I'll just do 10 books, and we'll start off with this top one, and we'll see if I can get it to behave. What I want to do is tap onto the picture and then expand it so you can see a nice big picture. Okay, great. It worked just fine. This first one did anyway. This is by Virginia Heath. It is a Harlequin historical romance. Harlequin Romances puts out regular series of books every month. Those of you who don't know Harlequin Romances, there's not just the one romance every month. They do suspense and Christian, and they also do 4 historical romances a month, and they're usually really, really good. They're my favorite Harlequin romances. And this latest one by Virginia Heath, the first book that your TBR BY, is one of her Wild Warriners series. So they're vaguely Regency romances revolving around a group of the Warriner men, the men of the Warriner family. And this one is a Warriner to Tempt her. Doesn't look so bad, does it? Well, not the cover. Of course, the cover looks just fine. Hubba, hubba. But I mean, the reflections, the visibility, and all. You can see me in the corner there. But that's not so bad. This is a Warriner to Tempt her, and it stars a headstrong young woman who has vowed that she has had enough of men. Haven't we all been there? And she finds just what the title says: a man to tempt her. Significantly more cerebral than most of the Warriner men. So that was a little bit of a departure, but I liked it. And the next one is YA, and it's not new. There's a special edition reprint that's coming out because the book is about to be made into a movie. But the book is so wonderful. I loved it when I first saw it so much that I'm happy to recommend it again. Let's see if we can get this to behave. It's by Becky Albetalli, and it's Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. Which came out years ago and is now being made into a movie that is certainly going to disappoint me. I don't know about the rest of you. It's directed by a third-rate hack, and in addition to that, it, for some inexplicable reason, stars. The actor is in his 20s. But he's a 5-pack-a-day, 6-pack-a-day tobacco addict, and has been since he was 13. So he looks, sounds, and acts like a 40-year-old. And I'm still not really clear on why a teenager couldn't have been found to play a teenager, but that's okay. The movie doesn't really matter. I will of course see it. I think I have a screener for it already. But I'm not holding out much hope. But the book, it's a perfect opportunity to recommend the book. The book is wonderful, but a closeted gay teenager in high school who suddenly becomes, weirdly enough, in the 21st century, an object of blackmail. And Simon is not so much concerned for himself. He is concerned for himself. He doesn't want to go through the hell of being tortured in high school. But he's more concerned about his email correspondent, who's been operating under a pseudonym, but whose identity could be learned. And Simon is what the chosen people refer to as a mensch. And he doesn't want that to happen. And the book actually handles all of that really well. So I do recommend it. And then the next one, let's see if we can get this to behave. These pictures are behaving themselves so far. Next one is by Joshua Zeitz, and it is Building the Great Society Inside the Johnson White House, which is it's a presidential biography, really. I mean, you get Johnson's whole life. It just centers on his time in office. And I don't expect 2018 to be the bounty of presidential biographies that 2017 was. 2017, I was up to my ham hocks in them. I don't think 2018 will be quite like that. This book, starting off in January, is really quite good. There's also a very good book coming out on President Carter, and there's a big new book coming out on Wilson, on President Wilson. So we'll see. I could end up being wrong. There's also a little Presidential Lives volume coming out on William Howard Taft. I will report back. But Joshua Zeitz did a book called Lincoln's Boys a few years ago that was really good. I think I reviewed it. If I remember, I will put the mention of it down below when I list the mentions of all these books. He's an extremely lively historian, and in this, if anything, you want him to go on longer, because the Johnson White House was a fascinating place. Not necessarily healthy, but a fascinating place, full of outsized egos, especially the man in charge. And he captures all that wonderfully. So he's really good on personalities as a historian. He's really good on personalities. So I do recommend this one, even though it runs the risk of being the first of ever so many presidential biographies that I end up recommending in one way or another over the course of the year. And then the next one is Broad Scale History, and it's huge. I should warn those of you who might be a little on the shy side. It's 1,200 pages long. But anybody who knows the author or knows about the author would expect that. This is by Guy Arnold, and it's Africa, A Modern History. Giant brick of a thing from a guy who has been working on the front lines in Africa and understanding its people and its cultures for half a century. So really, in a way, this is a book that a lot of people have been waiting a long time for him to write, me included. And as is always the case with books that you wait a long time for someone to write, the worry was that it would be terrible, that it would be just rambling. And instead, it's a masterpiece, truly a masterpiece, just incredible. It's serious history, so it's not a thumbnail sketch. It's not a quick overview, as if the length wasn't going to be indication enough. You have to know what you're getting into. But if your history reading muscles are in good shape and the subject interests you, and of course Africa in the last 70 years is a fascinating subject, then I highly recommend it. It is the best book on the subject that I've read probably ever. I mean, The Scramble for Africa was really good. John Reeder's Africa was really good. They were both exceptional, but this is a masterpiece, so I highly recommend it. The next one is a kid's book. It's this. Let's see if it's going to correct itself. There we go. I Know a Rhino. This is by Charles Fuge, and it is about a little girl who spends all day, every day, with animals, with rhinos and pigs and giraffes. And as the book goes on, as the pages go on, you start to wonder how this could be possible. What is actually going on here? Are these animals imaginary? And if not, what's going on here? And the author plays that really well, and the illustrations are just absolutely adorable. So in terms of reading it for yourself, which is what I did, I recommend it. But also, it's a terrific book to read out loud. I plan on doing that many times in January. The next one is a gigantic, heavy, $150 comic book anthology. So not for everybody, in other words. It's the DC Comics has been putting out beautiful, fully restored anthology editions, omnibus editions of their their golden age work from 70 years ago. They've been doing it for all of their characters, their marquee characters, and they've been doing it for Superman. And this is Volume 5. This is Golden Age Superman Omnibus, Volume 5. There's the Man of Steel saluting World War II era fighter planes, which is slightly misleading because this anthology covers demobilization. This is the Superman. These are the Superman comics that were coming out for an audience that DC Publications knew was no longer more or less captive. I mean, DC Comics, the United States government shipped bale loads of Superman comics to GIs in the field and stationed all over Europe because they were extremely popular with the troops and just as escapist fantasy. And these issues came out when the war was ending and then over, and the publishers had to realize, okay, what's going to go on here? This actually is a kind of new world for Superman. It should change the tone of the stories that we tell, maybe. It should change Superman's character, maybe. And you can feel in this volume, some of these issues have not been reprinted in forever. Some of them, in fact, unless I'm mistaken, have never been reprinted. And you can feel that happening in this volume. In the previous volume, Anthology Volume 4, you could feel the characters, the writers evolving Superman as a science fiction creation, getting slightly more powerful, getting slightly more interesting personality-wise. In this, you can see the writers feeling their way towards a new kind of Superman story. What will Superman be in the 1950s? As opposed to in the 1940s. And I apart from the entertainment value of the stories themselves, I found that evolution just fascinating. I just loved it. Then we'll, let's see here, we'll do the made-up stories next, a couple of them, because what would a list like this be without fiction? And the first one that I want to recommend is by Sharon Bala. It's called The Boat People. It's got a lovely U.S. cover. So the feedback here might obscure it, but it's a story that I would not have thought I would like because it's so hot-buttony. Sri Lankan refugees on a boat coming to Vancouver, trying to integrate and being met with anti-immigration fervor and also the fine-tooth combing of the law. But the author does a fantastic job of selling her story, and she also makes it more complex than that. It's far more complex than just ripped from the headlines on any question of immigration or deportation, because the main character, the father who has brought his family over and escaped the horrific violence and upheavals in Sri Lanka, might not have clean hands, and that is what you need, I think, in a story like this. If you just plop a refugee story in front of your readers and say, well, you'd better be interested, or you're a racist. If you just do that, in addition to getting on the Man Booker shortlist, you've also failed as a novelist. You have to add a story to that. You can't just skate by on a premise. And this author seems to know that, so she doesn't do that. She adds a story to her premise, so that you're not supposed to just genuflect. You're supposed to be interested in whether or not... And also, a fascinating approach that she takes is that we see multiple layers, multiple stages of immigration and integration. Not just from the lawyer who's handling the case that eventually erupts around this guy is a new immigrant, and the judge is a children of immigrants. So you get the immigration, the whole where do you make a new homeland? How do you start a new life? When are you entitled to do that? Is woven all through the book with all kinds of complexity because of that. Very good plotting decisions in the course of this thing. And also, and you don't hear me say this very often, a fairly competent ending. And then the next one I want to do here is, it's also a made-up story. It's by an author. I didn't know the author of The Boat People at all, but I know this author quite well, and I really like him, and this book is a hoot. This is The Nothing by Hanif Kureishi, which is about a much honored but old and gone to seed movie director who starts to have suspicions. He starts to have suspicions about his wife and about a longtime acquaintance of his, and those suspicions blossom outward to become suspicions of everybody and everything. And a term that has often been used for Kureishi over the course of his career is black humor, to the point where you almost start to wonder what that means. But this book is a perfect seminar in black humor. You have to be in the right mood for it. But if you are, it's a really mean, really smart performance. And then I want to move on to Science, a book that I thought would be kind of dry, but it was really, really good, entirely thanks to the narrative ability of the author. This is by Michael Graziano, and is called The Space Between Us. And the cover is the cover is meant to just to show primates crammed together. But the book is really about a thing that's difficult even to describe, even though we all experience it. In fact, if you're a human being and you don't experience it, you have a recognizable psychological defect, and that is this force field, is what the author calls it. This your personal space bubble, and what that actually is, why it would evolve, what its extent is, what its benefits are, what it actually does for people. The space between us. What does it mean? It was the first book that I've ever read about the subject of personal space bubbles, which we all talk about. You're in my personal space, but we don't, exactly, or at least I have never exactly quantified it. And all of the biological stuff that goes along with it is just fascinating. I found it absolutely fascinating. The type of popular science writing that we don't get enough of. I mean, this guy really knows his subject matter, stints on none of its complexity, and yet makes an immediately readable book. That doesn't happen very often, at least not often enough for my taste. And the last book, I think we're at 10. My numbers could be off, but the last book is straight up history, and it's not just straight up history, it's Tudor history, York and Lancaster and Tudor history. It's by Amy License, and it's called The Lost Kings. And there's got a skull with a crown on it, and it takes a familiar tack, a kind of familiar story, which is what ifs, might have beens, by looking at all of the young men in the houses of York, Lancaster, and Tudor who died before they could come to any kind of power, before they could lead troops, before they could become heirs apparent, before they could become king, and sort of examines them. And you read the book, after 50 pages, you're just lost in speculation about what would have happened if any of these people had lived. How badly would they have altered history if they had lived? And also, the author doesn't stress this too much. She brings it up a couple of times, but you can't help but think about it in the course of reading the book, is how thin a thread these things hang on. That we like to think, the king takes the throne, begets an heir. If the heir is a male, then the male, succeeds him. Then you get to the Tudors, and all of a sudden the idea is domesticized of, the heir can be a woman. It's the state that matters. So a daughter can take the throne, and you don't ever think about it's sort of a footnote that you just sort of pass over quickly. How many times you read about babies dying? How many times you read about teenagers dying? Even when it comes to the forefront, like for instance in the Tudor dynasty, you have a Tudor king, a crowned Tudor king, who dies as a young man from disease, and not only that, but of course Henry VIII's firstborn, the heir on which he staked everything, the heir that would have changed the world, would have obviated the need for the Protestant Reformation, at least in England, would have made sure that none of us had ever heard the name of Anne Boleyn. That heir died as a baby, and that's incredible to think about. What would have happened if that hadn't true? That's pure chance. And this book goes into all of them, not just the big examples, but all of the ones from York and Lancaster that end up being just as interesting. So there you have it. That was the maiden try with doing pictures on the yoga book. I think it went fairly well. And those are just 10 books that might interest you to read that are coming out or out already in January. Some of them are probably out already because I'm a little late getting this video up. But it's the first of a torrent of videos now that I'm back. So I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.